Welcome to... Did this last week. Welcome to the Tomes of the Traveler. For the True RPG. If you're a player playing in the True RPG, this is the program, I like that. This is the series that can help you make a good character, or play a good character, or just understand the rules of the True RPG. This episode, I will be guiding you through how to make a good RPG character. 2 episodes ago, we had an episode on how to make the RPG character sheet and fill it all out, and that was the mechanical side. But I did promise, or at least say I might, create this video, which is how to make a good character, not on the mechanical side, but on the role-playing side, or on the creative side of things. So in this video, I'm going to outline some boundaries and some ideas on how to make a good character. Take this with a grain of salt. This is just from my experiences. I've played a bunch of different RPGs, maybe 100 sessions total. So I have some experience, but like I'm not all-knowing or anything like that. And this might apply to some groups, and some groups might not work for, right? It also depends very solely on the game master that you have that's running the game, and so ask them about some of these things. A lot of the process of creating a character is going back and forth between you and the game master, and just kind of talking a lot before the campaign, and creating a good character that fits in the world and can go with the plot, and is just overall an interesting character that kind of works for what the game master also wants in their campaign, so that your character can align with the vision of the game master. Number 1, we need to create the meta type. It's very important to know what kind of character you're in, and it depends very solely on the tone of the campaign. So if the game master is DMing a very serious campaign, you should have more of a serious character with a deep backstory and that kind of thing. But if they're playing more of a joke campaign, or like a non-serious, a whimsical campaign, maybe more like Adventure Time, or even like a comedy campaign or an anime campaign or something like that, using the True RPG or any other RPG, then you should make a joke character. Or if you just want to make a joke character no matter what, that's fine. But there's a type of other third one. So there's serious characters, joke characters, and then there's a third one, which is the meta joke serious character. And MJS is what I'll call them. So MJSs are interesting because in the metagame, you have a joke. Like, for example, their name might be ridiculous, or overall, it might just be like something like Nikolai Prison is one from another group that I've heard of, where their name is ridiculous, but the character's somewhat serious. I think I was also a joke character, but still, in this case, you have a serious character with a good backstory and all the things filled out for a serious character, but they have like a joke name, or their gimmick is silly, or something about them makes them a funny character, and that way they're memorable, but at the same time not too serious. So it's like you're not taking your character seriously, but you also put a lot of work into them. So there's a good balance there. So if you want to have a meta joke serious character, that's also an option. And I will go through all of these meta types. With the rest of the steps, I'll sometimes point out, for this meta type, you can do this sort of thing. For this meta type, you can do this sort of thing. And some of the steps are completely irrelevant for different meta types. So I'll move on. Number 2. That came out weird. Number 2. Depressing. Oh, that's not at all what we're talking about yet. Palette. So the palette is also important, and it's very similar to the meta type, but it's more specific. So while the meta type is overarching, almost like a metagame kind of understanding of your character, or tone to your character, the palette is a little more specific in the way that it could be like depressing, or whimsical, or driven, or chaotic, and it is pretty much like because if you know about art, each art piece has a certain palette, and in a way, each character is a piece of art. And so you need a certain palette so that there aren't certain ideals that just completely clash with the rest of their character. Or there aren't, for example, they aren't like a serious character that is like a knight or something like that, but they always wear like bright purple and dance around. Like that doesn't really fit. And in a way, that's mixing serious character and joke character. But palette is a little more specific in the way that it's like, if they're going to be chaotic, if that's like their palette, then choose things that are chaotic. If they're going to be dramatic, then choose things that are dramatic. If everything they do is just going to be like super whimsical and who cares, then make that their palette overall. Don't make it so that some things in their character are very serious, because that just kind of clashes with it. Unless you want a broken palette, and that's fine, that works for some characters. There can even be some like humor in that, where everything is, for example, you could have a character that is extremely serious, like an edgelord, totally edgelord, but then you look in their backstory and it's like the most peaceful, like they grew up in a village, and they had nice parents, and they just left their village to search for work or something like that. Like they have the most boring, like simple, innocent background, but they are like the most edgelord character that just, like they're lone wolf, they like sharpen their knives, they have black hair. Like you could have that clash, and that works. That's actually funny. But if you're gonna do that, make that purposeful. Don't make that, because that's a purpose, like that's the main thing in art. Be purposeful with everything in art. Don't choose random bits and pieces just by random, right? By random chance. You have to know what you're doing a little bit. So if you want to have a broken palette, go ahead. If not, try to keep it consistent. That can make for a good character. Now, for number 3, race. So in the true RPG, races are practically whatever the game master wants for their world, because there are no set races. In the site, there is actually a translation from D&D races if you wanted to use those. I've played a campaign where there are only humans, that's the only race, but I'm also DMing a campaign pretty soon using the true RPG where they can pretty much be any race they want, and they just have to pass it by me. And what I'm doing is pretty much they can make their race, and there are a few guidelines that I have for making your race if it's any race that you want. And if it's a certain race like vampire, things like invincibility, there are going to be drawbacks, like not being, like sunlight sensitivity, that kind of thing. And also there's a power tree that I'm going to make for specific races if they're powerful races, so that they'd have to actually use their starting skill points to kind of get their powers for their race, so that they're not just overpowered, because you don't want a player to be overbalanced or underbalanced, or you want everything to be very balanced with the group, so that not only do they, because you don't want other players to feel like they're being dwarfed, and you also don't want your monsters to just be nothing, unless that's the type of campaign you're in. But if you have monsters or NPCs or battles or that kind of thing, any combat whatsoever, you don't want it to just be stupidly, ridiculously overpowered for the players compared to them, because then there's never any tension, and you sometimes want tension. You want to be able to build up that tension, but this is kind of becoming like game masters. This is like a note to the game masters more than it is the players, so I'll move away from that. But here are the 5 things if you're creating your race. If your game master said you can be whatever race you want, and you're creating your race, there are 5 things that you can do. So first, they must speak the same language as everyone else, and if they don't, that's a quirk, which we'll talk about later. But if they don't, make that like their one quirk. You should only have one quirk. So I think I've talked a little bit about that in the Grimoire episode, about how to make NPCs, about quirks and that sort of thing. And if you're going to make that their quirk, that should be their only quirk. So they can speak the same language. They are mobile, either by walking or flying, but somehow they can move so that they can actually kind of go through the story, and that's not a hindrance. And they can fight, or at least get away from fights, or do something so they don't just die if there's any conflict. And then they should have the ability to progress, become more powerful, pretty much just get powers, but that's the mechanical side. As a character, they should be able to move forward, and that also means that they should have some things that like are drawbacks for them, but they can kind of overcome as the campaign goes on. And so that has to do with race and also just overall character. But if you have a race that just cannot change, then, like for example, like a robot that just does not ever change, that could create some problems. And they have to be able to interact with the other player characters in such a way that isn't just ridiculous. It could be ridiculous at first, but there needs to be some sort of actual communication going on so that they can kind of join into the plot, join into the story that the game master's created, and overall just interact with things and not be so weird that they just don't really work in the world. And I think that those are 5 steps, but there is like a bonus step, which is just they have to fit within the world's tone, within the world's just dynamics, lore, all that sort of thing. And on that note, if it does break lore, or if it does go against what the Game Master's idea or plan is for their campaign, and they deny it, they have the total right to do so. Don't like be mad at them for limiting your choice or anything like that. Like, they're doing it for the best campaign. They just want things to be fun, want things to be good, and so they have the final say. Just gonna say that. So now for number 4. That's 3. Quirk. So when you have your quirk, which I've spoken about a little bit before, it depends completely on what your meta type is. So if your character is a joke character, then you should definitely have a quirk. It should be something ridiculous, it should be something funny. That works. If they're a serious character, not a meta joke serious character, but just a serious character, you don't necessarily need a quirk. It can take away from the character's seriousness or importance or depth if you do have a quirk, because it can kind of in a way simplify the character more than you might like. But if you have a meta joke serious character, then you can have a quirk if you want, but once again, it's very optional. But if you're going to have a joke character, definitely have a quirk. It's very important. And so now, I've been talking about a quirk. What is a quirk? So a quirk is something that everyone will remember your character by. After the campaign, when your character dies, or just when the campaign's done, you're not playing your character anymore, you want people to remember your character. You don't want to just drift away into the endless abyss of time. No. You want to stay in everyone's minds, so that they can tell stories about this character and be able to say, they were this character, they did this was the funny thing, this was their one thing. You see, a quirk, though, is different than a gimmick. A gimmick is an overarching idea, almost an archetype of the character, while a quirk is more of a specific thing that they do. I'll give some examples. So, a quirk is a priest in a white robe who never wants to get his robes dirty. Or a wizard who snaps or claps when casting spells. Or like a monk who says very profound things, but they're always meaningless. Those are quirks. Those are specific things that this character does, and it's like interesting, and people will remember it. But with examples of gimmicks, a gimmick could be maybe like a dude is obsessed with pizza, and everything he does is pizza related. Or a bard rhymes everything he says, or has puns all the time. Or maybe like there's an amnesiac traveler that has lost their way and is just searching for meaning in their life or something like that. Like, that's the third one's a more deep one. You could probably have that for a serious character, but at the same time, if you have that for a joke character, that's also kind of funny. So that's a gimmick. It's overarching. It kind of wraps everything in a bundle. While quirks are just little things that don't even really have to do with the core of the character, but are just interesting things that kind of remind you of the character. As long as they remind you of the character, your quirk is good. And quirks need to be both unique and original. That means the same thing. Quirks need to be both simple and unique for them to work. Because if a quirk is too complex, no one will remember it. And if a quirk is like really contrived, really, it just kind of follows a trope. Unless that could work, but usually that's going to be just kind of lame, and people are going to be like, okay, whatever. Oh yeah, that guy that copied the X-Men or whatever. That's for quirks. And we'll come back to simplification of a character as a later on step, which is a very similar thing. But now for step 5. Character voices, character accents, dialects, that sort of thing is very important for a character. It can really distinguish them from everyone else in the group, and also distinguishing your character's voice from your own voice makes it so that your metagame speech is different than your character's speech, and that can really make things move more smoothly, and overall it's just a better thing for the game. But not only that, when you have a character voice, it makes it so that if you're playing a serious character, it can really add depth to your character and like immerse everyone in the world, and it's really important. But if you're playing a joke character, you can have the most ridiculous voice, and it's amazing how that can just transform a character into just being so much more funny and so much more ridiculous. So if you want to have, no matter what kind of character, no matter your meta type, you should have a character voice, even if it's just slightly different. Like, some people don't really know how to speak in any other accents or that kind of thing, and yeah, it's difficult. You don't want to choose a voice that's way too hard for you. That'll just slow things down and kind of make things awkward. But if you can, for example, my voice is usually at this tone. But if I'm playing a character and I slow down my voice a little bit, maybe add a little harsher tones and a deeper That's a slight difference, and yet it makes so much of a difference, especially if I keep that up with the character. But you got to be consistent with it, and by being consistent in your voice, it also kind of holds the player accountable to the fact that they are not their character, and it holds them accountable to role-playing that character, because they're like, oh, my voice is different, and so my character, who I am, is different while I'm role-playing this character. And so that can really inspire good role-playing. And so it's just a good practice. Even if you're starting out, just have a character voice. It's kind of awkward at first, especially if you're new to RPGs. It's kind of like, ooh, it pushes you out of your comfort zone, but it's so worth it. And it can really pull you into the game and make everyone more immersed. So, for number 6, flaws. Flaws are overall a D&D concept. In the player's handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, there's a whole flaws kind of section, and it depends also primarily on background, that sort of thing. In the TroRPG, it's more free than that, but it is generally the same topic, generally the same idea. For every character that I have, I usually have 3 flaws, and they're kind of fundamentally linked, but at the same time different, and they kind of each get a different idea. And having more flaws makes it so your character is more realistic, but also can make it so that if they overlap, that can be hard to roleplay. So 3 is a good number because the chance of more than 2 overlapping at once is very low when you have 3. So the first flaw should be linked to their personality traits or bonds. So if they have something in their background, like for example, if their backstory, something traumatic happened, then that could maybe impact everything they do. And if they're making choices, or if they're doing certain things, or if they're talking to people, then it impacts whenever that thing is brought up from their backstory and their bonds. And so having that flaw can really add some depth to the character and draw out their backstory a little bit, and just develop the character over time. So the second one is kind of linked to that, and it could be the same thing. For example, if there's trauma, then they could have a phobia from it, and that's what the second one is, phobia. So if they're scared of something or just really dislike something, and like avoid it at all costs, such as like the fear of rats or something like that, or nyctophobia, the fear of darkness, then that can create some interesting points for your character, and also it shows weakness. And weakness in a character is just as important as strength in terms of creating realism for your character. Now the third step is something that like brings your character into an uncontrollable rage, something that would make your willpower go to full, something that's an extreme pet peeve for your character. This could be a whole myriad of things, like for example just spell casting, or a certain type of spell casting, or maybe it could be so many different things. Maybe even just people saying a certain word or calling them a certain name. This just like ticks them off. And so when you have that, it can really bring them into rage. So even if they're the most rational and like pragmatic character, you can still have that to kind of almost bring them out of their normal character in these situations. And then it can also develop the character a little more. Like, why do they have this flaw? Why do they get mad at this? What ticks them off about this? And it could just be random, or you could actually draw some depth from their backstory in that. Number 7, bonds. So bonds are another Dungeons & Dragons piece. Bonds are probably the most simple part of your character. They're just taking a bit of your backstory and placing it in a sentence and making that part of your character's inhibitions in everything they do. The bond should be the central point of your motivation, or at least be linked to it in some way, because your motivation should be built on your backstory. And motivation we'll talk a little bit more on number 8. But for bonds, you should definitely try to make it original, try to make it special to your character, unique to your character, because it can be really lame. Like, try to stay away from cliches like, my village was destroyed by orcs and my parents died fighting them and now I hate orcs and want to slay them all. Like, that's kind of boring. Try to make it something interesting, something that's special to your character and can really draw out depth in your character, rather than it just being, oh, he's just another fighter character that has the same backstory as everyone else. Like, make it interesting. But also for a bond, there's a very simple way to make it up. So take one little piece from your backstory that was very important and like changed your character's motivation, or changed just your character at their very core. Put that in a sentence, put a comma after that, rather than ending the sentence, and then put why or how that has affected them and how that affects everything they do. I usually have just one bond, but if you have like a character with a big backstory, or if you're a high level character, you can definitely have more, but having one bond is usually good, like minimum and sometimes maximum. Personal quest. So that is number 8. Something that we really create a firm foundation for your character's motivation is overarching quest that kind of drives them in everything they do, and should also align with the plot that your DM is creating. So speak to your DM a little bit. They obviously won't give you too much information because they don't want to spoil their whole campaign, but having that little bit of personal character motivation to kind of drive them in their own quest that might be slightly different than everyone else's in the group, and might not align perfectly with the main plot, and might cause them to do things that are actually against the players at some point, but generally brings them in the same direction as the rest of the player characters. That's a very important thing to do. And so here's some examples of some personal quests. So, like, I was wronged by a witch who humiliated me by turning me into a frog, and now I want to outlaw the existence of witches and just magic as a whole in the realm, and I'm on a witch hunt because of that. Or, like, there's an obsidian-helmed dwarf who insidiously killed my father, and so I'm trying to find him and kill him to avenge my father and all the other people that he's killed. Like, these are, like, interesting quests that are specific to your character and probably won't, like, fall into other player characters' backstories, but at the same time, it's something that drives your character along and probably won't be fixed until maybe the end of the campaign, or maybe at a certain arc where your motivation will change and your personal quest will change. And when starting out with your character, it's always good to make one short-term personal quest and one long-term personal quest. Short-term can kind of draw you into the campaign, get you started, and long-term can kind of be just that, long-term, so that it can be throughout the whole campaign. And short-term could even last like first 1 to 8 sessions kind of thing. It could be not super short-term, depending on how long the campaign is. But after that, you should definitely have like a long-term, like ideal level long-term idea. And a quest is a little different than an ideal. We'll talk about ideals later though. Now for a little break with number 9, trinkets. This is a fun little thing. You can have a physical object that kind of adds to your character in a few different ways. One, it could just talk about their backstory, or it could just kind of hint to things that have happened to them, but it could also just be like almost a personification or a representation of the core of their character or something that's happened to them. And a trinket should have some interesting quality to it. For example, it could be as simple as a sword or a book or an amulet, but rather than just having just those, you should have it like a purple sword, or a book with no cover, or like a white amulet or something like that. Something give it a little more flavor, and in doing so, you actually kind of almost develop the character a little more in that, because it's like, this makes sense, they would hold on to it. And in many ways, your character should be personally attached to this trinket that they have, and they should spend a lot of time, like in their downtime, they should just have it out, or they should do something with it, so that other player characters can ask, what are you doing, or what is that, or that kind of thing. And then you can kind of develop their character in downtime just as much as you can in uptime. And so in having your trinket, you can develop a lot about your character just in the subtle things about like what they have on them. Of course, if they were to lose this trinket, they would have to go on a quest to try to find it, because it's like a personal attachment, sentimental attachment to them. And so that can also create some more depth to your character in a way, and you can roleplay emotions with that too, which is always a good thing. Now, back to more important things, ideals, number 10. So, ideals are more long-term than even long-term personal quests. So ideals are more long-term than even long-term personal quests, because they are overarching ideas of this would be what life would be in a perfect world. So it's always good to have those, and having too many of them can be bad. And also, I think ideals are very based on alignment. So there's a chart that'll show up right here or here, showing how many ideals you should have roughly based on your alignment. And if you're not using alignment, maybe just think about what alignment would work best, or how many ideals would work best for your character. But you don't want to have too many, and you definitely want to have at least one, because that can kind of, I don't know, bring out an important aspect of your character in the way that they kind of are detached from reality in this one facet of life. An example of how personal quests and ideals are different is the following. So, personal quest might be like, you want to kill an evil king, but an ideal is you want to wipe out all tyranny from the world and eliminate any evil that might plague the world through places of power. So you could just, it's way more large scale and it's way more broad. It's way more like extreme kind of thing. So that's the difference. Now back to an earlier idea, simplification. So this kind of aligns with Quirk in many ways because it's the essential part of your character, something that they will both be remembered by, and if they're just being referred to, for example, Xinjiang referred to as the pacifist monk. That's like a perfect thing for Xinjiang right there. You don't need anything else. You can maybe add short in there, but if you're just trying to make it 1 or 2 words, pacifist monk works the best. So simplification is taking your whole character and suppressing them, compressing them into 1 or 2 words that accurately portrays the essence of who they are. By doing that, you solidify the character's essence in your mind so that it makes it easier to roleplay them. And also everyone else will understand your character way easier. If you're playing a joke character, you can definitely roleplay that to the extreme. Go ahead, that should be funny. So, now for number 12. Consider your level in your backstory. In the True RPG, it's a classless and levelless system, but there is a chart that can be used that'll be beside me, where I think it's this direction. I don't even know anymore, but there's this chart that shows how you can kind of align Dungeons & Dragons 5e levels to True RPG skill points that you can use for powers, and it kind of aligns them and shows, for example, if you start out with 50 skill points, then that's like a level 6 Dungeons & Dragons character. And so if you're going to have that character, they're relatively powerful. They can do some stuff. So in your backstory, you need to kind of create reasons for why they are that powerful, what they've done to kind of build those skills and how they failed, how they've moved forward, that sort of thing. And so what I like to do is, for each level in Dungeons & Dragons, I do this for Dungeons & Dragons, but this works because of the translation. For each level in Dungeons & Dragons, I would create 1 more paragraph of backstory for them. And maybe start out with like 5 at level 1 kind of thing, and then move up 1 for every level above that. And just kind of have a paragraph or even a page per level if you like writing, just to kind of develop a little bit of story for them, because it is a backstory. So in the same way, you want to kind of balance the level of your character, or how many skill points they start out with, or that sort of thing, to their backstory in the way that, for example, if they're you don't want to have your character kill like an army of dragons in their backstory, but they only have 12 skill points, which translates to like a level 1 D&D character. Obviously, that's not going to work. And in the same sense, you don't want to have like a character with 120 skill points or something like that, which translates to a level 12 D&D character, and they haven't done anything in their life, or they're just like the most bland character that lived in a village. Like, unless they're a joke character and that's their quirk, but like, that's always the exception. Is it their quirk? But yeah, you want to have those align, right? So that is how to make a good character for RPGs. Once again, this is my opinion, but it's just some things to think about, some things to work on, some boundaries for you. Sometimes you can be lost when trying to make a character, and this can just kind of, I don't know, help you. I hope it does. If it does, leave a comment about how it did, and also leave a comment about just simplification of your characters, or a quirk, or something funny about your character that you've created with the help of this video. Thank you for watching Tomes of the Travelers, brought to you by Zealots of Birbio, and I hope you have a wonderful Saturday, or whatever day you're watching this on. Farewell.